So welcome. I thought that today I would show you how I paint a painting, and I'm going to do it in the form of a tutorial, in an introduction to painting. But instead of showing you how you should paint, I'm going to be telling you how I paint, and you can use it in any way you want to. I have different rules that I have developed throughout the years for me, but feel free to break any one of them. And that's how I'm going to be doing it. I'm going to take you through the different ways that I use, what kind of brushes I use, how I use paint, what kind of canvas I use, and then I will be painting a painting, a very simple one. So I'm just going to show you the techniques and how I mix colors and so on, and you can follow along. I'm going to show you what kind of colors I use and how many, and you're going to see that here. So either you can follow along or just watch it, see if you can learn anything from it. So a very big reason why I'm not going to tell you how you should paint is because I was never taught painting. I am self-taught, and a lot of the things that I'm going to show you today, that's not how you would learn it in a school or from most other people, and a lot of the rules I'm going to be breaking and how paintings are usually built up, I don't follow. So take this for what it is. It's the way I paint, and yeah, with that, let us begin. So I paint from imagination and memory. That's the best way I can put it, which means that I don't look at anything, I don't look at nature while I paint, and that means that there are quite a few things to have in mind because it's going to be quite different from how a lot of people paint. And for those of you who already paint and do use a reference, for instance, it can be quite a challenge to break that or to do it differently, but I will do my best to show you how I do it and how I began, and maybe if you want to, that's something you can try too. I find that painting from imagination really frees you up, and it's just a wonderful way, I find, to paint a painting. So the first thing I wanted to show you is just the basics. So for instance, with the brushes, I use acrylic brushes, but I paint with oil. So the reason why I use acrylic brushes for oil painting is that the oil painting brushes are too coarse for me. So I paint quite fine landscape details, and the usual oil brushes are quite coarse. So I don't use those. So I use either acrylic or watercolor brushes. But as for the price and the quality, that really doesn't matter too much. I have found that some of the cheapest brushes are the best, and some of the most expensive ones I haven't really found a use for. And as you can see here, I have a wide variety of different brushes, and while I will often fall in love with one, for instance this one is one I use a lot these days, it's very helpful to have a lot of different brushes, and I'm going to show you why later. But for now, let's just say that the way the brush is shaped will determine a lot of things you can do with it. And a fan brush has a lot of uses that would probably surprise you if you haven't painted before, and you will need a very great variety of different brushes for quite a lot of the different things. But today I am going to be using only a few of these, and most of you will probably have brushes like this if you're already a painter. So I'm just going to be using a very simple one to put the color on, and then I'm just going to use the one that I just had, this simpler one, for details. And I think for today I am going to stick with these two, and we will see later if there's some extra detail work, then I might jump to one more, but otherwise it's these two that you're going to need for today if you want to follow along. Okay, and before we start, I will tell you what kind of colors you will need if you want to follow along. Let me get rid of this one. And I'm going to be using just a small canvas this time because it's going to be easier to show you, and I'm going to have more of an overview over the canvas. So the canvas I use, just to have that first, is a paper canvas, which means that It is especially prepared for oil painting, but it's it's just a lot more practical, especially if you want to go around. So there are 10 sheets of paper in a very good quality canvas paper in sheets on this one, and then you can peel them off afterwards when you're finished, and you can just start with the next one. But the main reason why I use it is just I found the quality incredible. This is Hanemühle. It does really matter what kind of a brand it is. So this isn't a sponsor content or anything, but it's just what I found to be much better than anything else that I have painted with. So this is Hanemühle Fine Art Canvas for oil painting. And I'm sure there are lots of other ones that are really good, but that's what I'm going to use now. And it soaks really well, and it seeps into the paper, but you can still, even a few days afterwards, you can still continue to paint on it and wet on wet, which means that it's not going to dry completely, and you can still mix the colors. So that's what I am using. If you want to paint along, feel free to use anything that you have to hand. A normal canvas will do just fine. Just notice that the paint might behave differently than it does for me if you're using a standard canvas. For instance, it will probably not dry as fast, which means that it's going to be more difficult to mix the colors in the same way that I do. So just keep that in mind. The colors that you will need for this, the colors that I'm going to be using, are just white. So this is just this is titanium white, which is one of the. You'll usually have zinc and titanium white in a set of painting, and I can recommend you to, at least in the beginning, it doesn't really matter too much with the quality. I don't know what kind. There are probably really bad quality some places, but in Norway at least, I haven't found any oil painting that you can buy, even not in the starter sets, that are much worse than even the more expensive paints. So I would just recommend you to use the basic ones, at least in the beginning. And the main difference will usually be the feel of the paint, a bit how long the color will last, and the brilliance of some paints. For instance, orange is one where I could recommend buying a bit more expensive one, but otherwise I wouldn't worry too much about it. And I'm going to use some more simpler ones that I have, which you'll usually have in any starter kit. So if you want to paint along, you'll probably have these colors. So it's going to be titanium white, orange yellow, which is a very standard orange, brilliant red, so that'll be a very standard one too, all of these ones, cadmium yellow, which is one of the absolutely basic yellows. I would recommend you not to use the lemon yellow too much, because it's actually there's some green in it. And cerulean blue, which is kind of sky blue, which is the basic sky blue that you'll get in any starter kit. And this is lamp black, and that doesn't really matter. Most of the blacks are very similar. Some of them are deeper and some of them are a bit lighter. But lamp black is a good one because it's just true black. And then this is just called violet, so I'm not entirely sure which one, but use any violet that you want to. Violet, I think, is just the name for the standard one, and usually if there are different names, it will be variations. Okay, so these are the colors that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be using this opportunity now to show you a bit different brush strokes techniques and so on, because that's something that really helped me in the beginning, was just how to use the brush. So what I'm using here for a dilutant is turpentine, but it's an odorless turpentine, because when you're inside it can be really, I love the smell, but it can be really intense. So when I'm not painting outside, I use an odorless turpentine for mixing. Okay, and I'm going to try to keep it simple, but I'm not going to do it too simplistically. I do want to show you exactly how I do it. So if you can follow along, that's great. If you can't, that's quite okay too, because it might look simple, but I suppose I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'm pretty sure that it isn't really as simple as it's going to look. So the way I will start with the painting, well, there are a lot of different ways that I could start it with, the sense of what kind of an idea I have, if I have any idea at all. If it's going to be a winter painting or summer painting, that can all vary. But what I will always do is I will just start with the background first. So what you'll find that a lot of painters do is that they will paint brown background and they will mark where things are going to be, but that's only possible if you have an idea of what you want to do, where you want to end up, and I don't. Even if I'll have an idea, if I want to paint a birch forest, let's say, I will still have no idea where things are going to be placed until I start painting. So the main thing to keep in mind when you start a painting like this, for me, is the colors of the horizon. And if I want to do a sunset or a sunrise or anything with where there's a colorful sky, I like to keep in mind the rainbow colors. So keep that in mind while you paint, while we paint here, that it follows the colors of the rainbow. And if you see a sunset, for instance, look at the sky and see the colors and how they appear, and you'll see the rainbow pattern in how the, for instance, they have the red sun, and from red you'll have orange, and then yellow will be kind of greenish, and then to the blue, and then from the blue it'll go over from the greenish blues to the more purple blues, and that follows the rainbow. So that's what we're going to do here. It's going to be a very standard one, where I'm just going to be starting with the blues, and just get some turpentine onto the brush, and we'll get our cerulean blue here. And the thing with the brush strokes is, because a lot of the time you'll just start with painting like this or like this, and what I found was incredibly helpful is that when you paint on the canvas to just make it completely blue, for instance, or you just want the color on top of it, or for the entire time really that we're going to be painting now, I paint in a cross. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and that really makes it a very even pattern onto the canvas, and you'll see it. And so that's just what I'm going to be doing. And a lot of this is just going to be showing you. I'll try to talk and let you know what I'll do. Sometimes I'm going to be speeding up the video if it takes too long. And yeah, so we're just going to start. And of course, it would be nice to have the canvas properly sturdy here. And yeah, so what I'm doing here is just to get the color that I want. And here you can see the pattern, the crisscrossing. And that prevents it from being any particular way. You can really, so the stripes aren't going from any side or so on. Yeah, you'll see why that's a good thing to do. And let's keep in mind the colors of the rainbow. We have blue here, and then after blue we'll have yellow, and yellow and blue will mix so that it'll be a bit green in between. And at some stages I will keep adding white into it, and that's just to get the hues right and to even it out a bit. A lot of these things I can't really tell you, I can only show you, because I won't know the reason why. I will just have an idea, and I have done this so often. So in between layers here, for instance, I want the yellow to go into the blue and become kind of a greenish blue. And so I'll put some titanium white in between, So this entire painting is going to be wet on wet, which means that I'm never going to let it have time to dry. This wouldn't dry for a couple of days at any rate. That's one of the reasons why I use oil painting. With acrylic paint, it dries a lot quicker. But with oil painting, it takes quite a while, and that's actually something I like. Yeah, and grab something to wipe your brush off of. Often I could recommend you to have lots of different brushes and use those, but I will often have just one brush, and I will keep having to clean it off while I paint. So I'm going to be doing this a lot, and this happens if you buy really cheap brushes. But sometimes, as I said, the cheapest brushes are those that I like the best, and this is one of them. This is a really cheap one from China, but I really like the way it flows, and so I keep using it, even though it is the quality isn't very good. So now that we have done that, I'll do some yellow. So from blue, green to yellow. And the fact that this is green now is not a problem, because that's exactly what I wanted to. I wanted to mix it, and then after this one is done, this is going to be pure yellow, so we're going to do some white afterwards to get the border. And you can see here what I'm doing, adding some white to it too. And a lot of this process is really just seeing how it looks while you do it. So there's no particular goal that I have in mind. I do this until I'm happy, basically. So just mix the colors and be careful, because you keep dragging the colors into one another. That is a good thing, and it can be a really bad thing. So here I have it's going from yellow and then the green into the blues, and now I would like to be a lot more yellow and to have the blue go away, because just a tiny amount of blue in the yellow will make it green. And for this part I do have to clean the brush quite well. So now, in order to get to the yellow, I'm just going to use some white to make the border. And as is the thing I want with these brushes, you keep having to clean them, because a lot of the color kind of stays here, and you have to wash them out a lot until you can actually have a true clean brush. So after this, the base is done, a lot of it is going to be mixing the colors with one another. But right now the goal is to have a pure yellow here. And I would really recommend having white in between of all of these layers. That does bring it a bit more to life. So now, this again, let's do some of that orange. Now you don't need orange necessarily here, because red and yellow is going to mix into orange. But The reason why I like to have a special color for each of these on the palette is that I can just have exactly the same color again afterwards, because here it's just going to be mixed and there's no good way to get the same color again. So just a slight layer of orange. Now oranges and reds, especially this orange is so much stronger than yellow that you don't need much. You'd overpower the yellow if you use too much of it. And that's why I'm going to be putting some yellow into it too, because I don't want it to be just orange. And as you can see, just a lot of this is just mixing them together, seeing what works, and seeing if you can get some a nice flow. And then we'll do the red. And at this point we've already done all of the main colors. The purple is going to be used afterwards on top of it, and I'm going to explain that afterwards. And then some orange into that too. As you can see, the red is very strong, and for that not to overpower the rest, I will have to put some yellow into that one. And all of this just simply follows the colors of the rainbow. And with that simple color scheme, you can really do a lot. And then now, to just have something to work with here, I'm just going to put white underneath the red. Because we can make some far off distant mountains, and it's nice to then have the color of the horizon already there, because that makes the distances seem more proper. And then here, while violet isn't what necessarily comes after red in the rainbow, if you would put the rainbows on top of each other, it really does. So the things that are truly far away over the reds, the clouds will often turn to that color. And so if you just imagine that the rainbow kind of keeps going after red, flips into over itself, we'll have violet afterwards. So violet can go on top after blue, but it can also go on the bottom with the red. And so we're just going to do that on both of these. And have the violet is going to be the clouds in a way that are on top of it, and it's going to be a base for the mountains. One really important thing to keep in mind is that if you ever look at a landscape and you see things that are really, really far away, they will turn blue. So I suppose that's the air in between. And the further away something is, the more blue it's going to look, usually. I mean, this isn't a clear-cut rule, but that means that if you want to create depth, paint the things that are furthest away a bit bluer than the things that are closer. And that's what we're going to do here. So we're just going to use the color of the sky to create the landscape that's in front of us here. And that's then kind of create the appearance of being really far away. And this doesn't necessarily always have to become mountains or something. It's just nice to have as a background, and that can eventually turn into anything. But I like to have the entire painting painted once before I start on any details. And then for the things that are really close, I'm just going to paint with our lamp black. Just that line. And we can see what we're going to want to do with it. But then you've created basically all of the different stages and all of the different what's going to be close, what's going to be far away, and so on. It's already, the base is already there. And for this painting, we're just going to, for the tree, we're just going to use black, so it's just going to be a silhouette, so to not make it too difficult. And here I like to just for some feel, that can be, just move it up and down a bit so you have some kind of a feel to it. And there we have the base of the painting. So now we have all the colors in place, and you already have the feeling of the sunset. And now is, I suppose, well, I often find it quite meditative, but it can probably in the beginning be somewhat of a challenge, because this is the part where you can really do damage to the painting. So we're just going to clean the brush. I'm going to clean the brush, you can clean yours if you're painting along. And now to smooth everything out a bit, and then I'm going to be placing a sun. And here it's really nice to put some white in it, for instance. If you want it, so I think if I want a sun here, it will be lighter all over this part. And so to put some white on the top. And then just go over it with the brush and smooth everything out. And this green is a bit too green, for instance. And I would like that to be a bit more believable, because that green is usually not the color that you'll see in the sky. You can see quite a bit of green, but not this extreme. So to get a more of a bluish green. And that's the thing here too, you can always just pick up the colors and move them down. So if I'm just doing like this, I can move the colors around and then make everything more even. So while it can look quite stark in the beginning, and it can be a bit shocking if you, often it can look a lot starker than it did on mine, you can then move the colors up and down and smoothen everything out. So that you'll just get, in the end, this could be, I think we're going to have some kind of a color, cloud feeling here. But you can do it in such a way that eventually it's just a very smooth transition. Well, I think this is a good illustration that you don't have to spend too much money on your brushes. Or, of course, if that's gonna annoy the hell out of you, maybe you do. But for me, it's a price worth paying to get the kind of brush that I want. Alright, I'm more happy with that. And here we have a sky, basically. So I'm not gonna do anything much more difficult than this. I think that's enough for now. And I'm going to be showing you, I'm going to be taking you with me outside, and we're going to be looking at how I prepare for painting a tree. So that's going to be next, because if you want to paint a tree in here now, which is what I want to do, and that's going to be basically the end of this. It's just going to plant a tree, and then we have the basics of an oil painting. But if you want to paint a tree into this painting now, you'll have to ask yourself, well, we're not using a reference. So if we're not using a reference, how are we going to know what to paint? And the way I do that is that I use the memory part of the imagination and memory. And I will go outside and look at a birch and show you how I try to, I'll draw a bit there to show you how I memorize it. And then we can come back in again and we can paint the birch that we just learned onto our painting. Okay, so now we are outside, and even though I paint from imagination, as I told you, memory is a big part of it. And now I want to collect the birch that we're going to be painting inside afterwards. So it's not going to be that tree. I'm not going to draw this tree and then put it into the painting the way that I know that a lot of people do. So what I do outside is to learn how birches grow, not that specific birch. So it basically just means that now I can see all different kinds of trees around me, and I'm just gonna try to figure out how they grow. So obviously I've done this before. I'm just gonna show you a bit how I do it so that you can do it, and afterwards when we go inside we can do that together. So for instance, now I can see a different birches here, and it's just to try to see what's actually going on. So what you can see really quickly is that it doesn't grow evenly. So for instance, I'm just going to do a small one here. I can see here we have a birch, and it's going to be a bit difficult to see it up closer. Probably you can find yourself a birch outside or look online if there are no birches around. But you'll see that they, 1, 2, and then so the logic of them is that they don't grow like, for instance, a pine tree would, where all the branches come out at the same place. They go unevenly. So that's important. We're not going to paint a very detailed birch. So it's not important. It's not important for me to get it exactly right. I'm not a scientific painter. It doesn't have to precisely be that tree, just to have the general rules so that you have something to go off of. So we have the different branches, and what you can really see in the birch is that you just follow that logic. So one branch goes out like this, then another goes here, and another here, and then we'll just continue that. And then we already have a branch. And the leaves, they don't come at the same place, they do exactly the same thing. So you can see that on a branch we have one leaf here, and then one here, and then one here, and then one here. Which makes sense, because the leaves are going to create the base for the next branch. So if a leaf comes out here, then that's going to grow into the next branch sometimes. And for instance, when you're just outside like this, just so many different details that you can soak in and that you can then transport inside. Either you can paint them really small and you can kind of just get the feel of the details, or you can look at the ones that are further away and see how they grow. So as we're not going to do the bark or anything like that, what I just like to do is just to sit and observe. And it isn't, the point here isn't to paint or to draw any birch or any tree in detail. It's just to soak in how they grow and just the feel of it. What I could heartily recommend is to get something like this, and you can get it online. It's a Chinese, well, it's a And in a way, it's a brush that you can use exactly like a brush, but you can take it with you outside, and it's filled with ink. And the thing you can do there is that exactly the way you would do inside. You can, instead of having to do the lines as you would with a pencil, you can just use it and then try to get the feel of how the trees are. So how they bend, and the thing that you will notice with birches is that they grow in clusters, so that the root system will be one birch. A lot of birches is basically one birch, so you'll see that they all grow out of one root system, and they're all clones. And here you can see they just do the opposite, the branches that are opposite of one another, and you already get a feel of how a little colony, how a cluster of birches grows. And that you can then transport inside. And you'll see how they will all grow, obviously because of the sun, they will all grow apart from one another, trying to capture the sun, and you'll get these groves of birches, and that's something that we can then take with us inside for after. And I don't think we're going to do any leaves, so the main thing is just to get the shape. And as you can see, the old ones, I like to do that too. You can see how the young trees are just really straight, and then you'll get the old, really gnarly trees, and you can get the different generations of the trees too, which is something I really do like, because then you can create a living forest. A lot of the forests these days will have just all the trees are 30 years old. That's not what I would like to do in the painting. I would like to get them from young to old. So yeah, the thing that I do, and I could heartily recommend, is just sitting outside, observing the trees around you, and draw what you see, the shapes, and just get a feel of it. And then some of the rules I would just get off Wikipedia as well, just to know, for instance, how they grow exactly, how the symmetry works. But otherwise, that's one of the wonderful parts of this way of painting, is that you don't have to try to capture how things look exactly. You just have to try to figure out how they work. So yeah, let's take this with us inside. Okay, so we're back inside, and I think it's time to plant those birches. Now it's dried a bit here, but it's still wet on wet, and you'll see that. One thing I do like with that is usually I can use some of the paint and to create the shading and so on, but this time it's just going to be black silhouettes. So there's no frame of reference, and the thing I like to do is just to begin. So I will have an idea that, okay, I would like to have the birch here, and it's based upon what we did outside. It's not going to be exactly anything like something I saw outside, but just we had that colony of different birches, and I think that was nice. And the way I do that is I just start. I just put down the brush, and then try to remember the kind of the shape it had, and use the brush to create some movement and to plant the tree, really. So this is quite just an intuitive way to do it, which is why it's nice to have spent quite a lot of time outside drawing those birches. And then you don't have to think too much, you can just see what works and then go from there. So once we have the stem, I keep saying we, but I'm imagining that there are going to be people that are painting along. So I mix the two. So we have painted that stem, and let's just do a few more stems, and imagine that it's one colony, but they're trying to collect sunlight, and of course they're going to block each other, so they're going to be bending outwards from the base of the colony here. So as I said, birches grow from one root system. A lot of trees will go up, they'll be clones of one another, and in a way they're the same tree. So they're not actually competing, but they're trying to collect light from different angles here. And so as you can remember, the branches of the birch are unevenly spread, unevenly. They're not opposite one another. So we'll have one here. If you have one here, then the next one is going to be on the other side, a bit further down. And as long as we have that pattern, it's really possible to forget all the other things and just continue with that. So you have the pattern, and then just continue really. Remember that, okay, it's going to be collecting light from different angles, and so you can always kind of imagine a little story and imagine how the tree has been growing and how it's spreading out. Of course, a lot of this is going to be difficult because it's a technical thing, so I can't really teach you how to do the brushwork here. That's just, you just have to do it and do it and do it, and eventually the lines can get finer. That's just a technical thing, and the only way to really get that done is to practice. And yes, you can see, you can just keep doing exactly the same pattern here. And that's helpful with a lot of different trees. So find the pattern within the tree. That's true for pine trees, that's true for any tree. Find that pattern, and then you don't have to look at anything. Then you can just paint, and you can just continue, and you'll have very lively trees without having to look at any reference point. So, and we're just going to continue to do this and make them smaller and smaller and more detailed. And what I really do like is the finer you can get those lines, the more realistic I find it will look, and the more impressive. So this, you can just really go into a meditative flow and just follow that logic, make them smaller and smaller. And what you can do is, you don't have to paint exactly every line the way I do. You can, at this point, you can use a different brush and just make dots, and it'll look very much like the branches are going incredibly small, and you can't really see exactly each branch. So you can do something like that too. I do like to paint every branch, but that's not entirely necessary. So there are so many different trees that you can do, and you can paint in this fashion with just simple rules of how the tree grows. Really will make it possible to paint it from memory and not having to look at a reference. I know that there's nothing wrong with looking at a reference. It's just, it's a different way of painting. So what I found, one of the reasons why I do it like this and I'm not looking at a reference, is that I always wanted to be able to paint from imagination. And every time I noticed that when I would paint from a picture or something, and I did it a few times in the beginning, that was a lot easier to do. And there was a lot more opportunities. You can paint whatever you want to. You can just look it up on your phone. But once I would put the phone away and I would try to paint without looking at something, it was impossible, really. And I realized that either I can paint everything I want to right away, but then I will always have to look at something. I will always have to have a photo. I will always have to look at my phone. I will always have to have a reference. There will be no going back if I continue this for too long. And so I decided to just never use a reference at all. because I could see the quality. It did take me almost a couple of years really to get back to the point that I was at when I still looked at things. So for instance, when I wanted to paint a little mountain or something, I would look at a picture of a mountain and just kind of try to copy that, which made it look really nice, but I couldn't free myself of it. And once I did, it was really difficult because it kind of threw me back quite in the skill of the painting and how it looked. A couple of years almost, or well, I hadn't painted for that long at that point, but at least to almost to the beginning. But that's why I did it, and it's really been very, very nice to then eventually, okay, so you have to learn everything, but then you do know it, and then you really know it. So even you can paint something from a picture, and then of course you will have learned a lot, and you can paint something like that from memory afterwards, but you'll never learn it in the same way that you do if you have to then paint it by heart. And so I can really recommend it. You don't have to do it always, and you can always, there are so many different ways of painting, but it's yeah, it's a particular form of painting, and I can recommend you at least trying it out. And so I would often use a bit more concentration on this, but it can really be done quite quickly, even if you have a lot of different small branches. And keep in mind that if you keep the same logic on it, it will look a lot more proper than if you break that logic, because then you're in the realm of fantasy, which is fine. But I like to have something in between, so it is imagination and it is fantasy, but it is possible. It could grow like this. It's possible for trees to grow in this fashion, and I like that part. So you're not thrown into a fantasy land. You can still imagine it actually being real, and that is something I like. That's not necessary to do either, but that's kind of the result of this. So now we have a tree. We have a little birch colony here. And I think I'm going to leave it like that for now. And we can do more advanced things in later videos. So this is just a very simple painting that follows really easy, simple rules. But it's really the basics of a lot of the things that I do. And I hope that you found it useful. So I'm going to leave it there. And I hope to see you in another video. And I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you for watching. And till then.